It is episode 147 of Decoding Fox News, and I'm your host, Juliet Jeske. Each week, I watch and analyze a whole heck of a lot of Fox News and then break it down. I watch all the Fox News you'd never want to. Let's get into it. Here's the headline. Blue Lives Matter, unless you defended the Capitol on January 6th. It's a condensed overview of 31.5 hours. That is brutal. Brutal. Don't do that. Don't watch that much Fox. Of Fox News for the week ending January 26, 2025. And it's actually it's Sunday to Sunday because Fox added a bunch of extra programming the day before the inauguration, which of course, like a masochist, I captured and covered. This is really hard. I'm laughing to keep from crying. The inauguration was just like root canal central. Root canal with no painkillers. Just gripping, just getting through it. And then all last week was like this. So this clip, trigger warning, this is some major fawning over Donald J. Trump. Fox is just 100% propaganda. This is Trump state media. No apologies. They might pivot. If things start to go south under this lunatic, they might pivot. Who knows? When they see an opportunity for something else, they might. I don't know. Here we go.
Look at this. Look on the floor. Y'all can't see it at home, but when we walked in, there's a big banner that says inauguration of Donald Trump, right. 47th president. That's when it just hit me.
Yeah.
I thought this is actually
You know what it hit me when we took the shot of him, you got to witness it live. But him getting on the military plane yesterday, him doing the salute. When he did the salute, I'm like,
first time in 4 years.
We are back in business, baby.
Yep.
Right.
Well, we were driving to the
broke the law. You got 10 million people that crossed this border in the last administration. All of them are not going to be able to stay. He talks about the minimum wage. Donald Trump is fighting for the worker. He's giving them no tax on the tips, no tax when it comes to the overtime. He's working with them. So you may not get the minimum wage, but at least you're getting something.
Daddy's back, and that's what you're going to see.
So you just touched.
This was a man who's met his destiny. He said he was saved by God in order to make America great again and usher in a new golden age. And the concentration of power that you saw in that room, probably the greatest concentration of power since the Constitutional Convention. It was probably the most ambitious speech ever given by a human being. It wasn't a political speech. This was a speech made by a hero. It was the most inspiring speech he's ever given that I've personally ever heard. And it's an exciting time to be alive.
So Daddy's home. And they may be pissed, but America couldn't be happier.
Idea of manifest destiny, that we're going to take back the Panama Canal.
Talking to everybody and makes everybody around him better.
All of us worked very hard for this day to come, and God bless America.
So I can't also include, all the clips this week are long, and there's a lot to them. So I couldn't include everything I wanted. But there was another montage I made of Sean Hannity just turning to his audience and saying, thank you for all that you did. Thank you for voting. Thank you for volunteering. Thank you for getting, and I'm like, how is this a news program? This is propaganda. Could you imagine? Now, Pod Save America, they are openly partisan, right? I wouldn't call that a news program. It's a podcast, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being pundits. They work for Obama. They do have a program where they're like, get out the vote, and they help people organize and that sort of thing. That is Pod Save America. That is a partisan podcast. Nothing wrong with that at all. They are not pretending to be a news source. And Fox News is claiming to be a news source. And Fox News is also incredibly critical of other news sources, constantly calling any other company or channel biased or as just galling, where Sean Hannity will say, MSNDC for MSNBC, or the D for Democrat. I was like, are you kidding? Listen to this crap. I don't like to curse. I don't know if crap is considered a curse word anymore, but I don't like to curse on the podcast. Is one of my rules. This giddiness of me is because this took a long time to put this one together, and I'm really tired, and I do kind of cope This is a coping mechanism I've had since childhood of laughing to keep from crying. So, whew, it's been a week. So last week, the folks at Fox News treated Donald J. Trump as if he were a supernatural being who came down from heaven on the wings of a bald eagle to vanquish the woke, transgender, cultural Marxist enemies of the United States and lift the nation up to a mythical state of its former glory when robber barons swam through the Panama Canal. That's not hyperbole. That's how ridiculous it was. It was so hard to take this. The network was hardly subtle as segments dedicated to praising the 47th president took up over half the airtime on the programs I covered last week. And that clip, that montage that I played, that's typical. Jesse Waters went on for like 7 minutes like that. Maybe not just him. 3 minutes, probably 3 minutes. That was like I think it was a 12 or 13 minute segment on the 5. And he just was like, he's superhuman. He's a hero. And I'm like, shut up, you stupid man with lots of hair and big eyebrows. Anyway, any pretense that Fox News practiced journalism was completely shattered, as Sean Hannity and Judge Jeanine Pirro both openly thanked their viewers for voting for Trump. And Greg Gutfeld boasted that 19 Fox News employees have been hired or appointed to be part of the Trump administration. So you tell me that this is a news program when 19 of your employees are now working or going to work with the Trump administration. This is ridiculous. Jen Psaki, okay, you have one from the last administration who's on MSNBC now. Jen Psaki, that's it. 19 for Fox. This is great. And don't even get me started on Pete Hegseth, because that's a whole 2 hours. We don't have time for that. But so yes, Fox News is now Trump state television. Other major stories on the network last week included Trump's decision to temporarily reinstate the Chinese-owned social media app TikTok, the tenuous ceasefire agreement in Israel, and the start of mass deportations. For this podcast, I'm going to focus on a topic that most of the on-air talent at Fox wanted to avoid: Trump's blanket pardon and commutation of over 1,500 rioters who attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Anyone watching Fox News exclusively last week might have missed out on the Prince Harry's huge legal win against the Murdoch-owned media empire, along with the legalization of same-sex marriage in Thailand. So shows I covered on Fox News last week: Fox and Friends, I got 4 hours on last Sunday, 3 hours on Monday, and then just the first hour for the rest of the week. The 5, which also included an extra episode on Sunday the 19th. Hannity, extra episode on Sunday the 19th. Also picked him up on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Ingram Angle, Tuesday through Friday. Things got wonky on inauguration. That's why I didn't get her on Monday. And then approximately 5.5 hours of the inauguration coverage on Fox News. So here we go. Before we get into the actual topic, we have to get in with how Fox was trying to deflect from the actual subject of pardoning people who beat cops, violently beat cops. So this is, of course, Joe Biden's decision to issue preemptive pardons to a number of people. And this started on the night of the inauguration. This is from Sean Hannity.
His last-minute preemptive pardons for his family, as we affectionately call them, the Biden family syndicate and their friends. Well, that was his final act as president.
So this is earlier that day on the 5, and this is Dana Perino talking about the same subject.
Joe Biden pardoned many of his family members, preemptive pardons. This is in addition to all the other pardons he had done around 11 a.m. And it's my contention, my belief that President Trump didn't know about these because they announced them after he had already walked into the rotunda. And it is quite brazen. And I think Democrats are going to have a hard time answering it. So let's start with you, and then we'll see how.
Interesting. And to me, it was stunning, although there's certainly been rumors about this, that Joe Biden decides that he's going to pardon pretty much all of his family. You know, the members, Harold, of the Biden crime syndicate, his brother Joe and his son, and I think some in-laws, Mark Milley, Anthony Fauci, preemptive pardon, meaning they aren't charged with anything, but we're going to tie the hands of the next attorney general to make sure that she, does not indict anyone. But I think what's so stunning is that the justification for this, Dana, where the statement from the Biden White House was, these people do not deserve to be targets of unjustified and politically motivated prosecutions. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. But the shame of this is that it is a recognition that that there is and was a possibility of, based on James Comer alone, there was enough evidence to indict based upon what he uncovered, but James Comer didn't have access to Merrick Garland's Department of Justice. So the evidence is there. They knew it. They have to stop it from the next attorney general.
Now, that was a bunch of malarkey that just came out of her mouth there, or I'd say nonsense. I just like to use malarkey since that's sort of Biden's word. So Representative James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky, the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government, never found any substantial evidence that linked President Biden or his son Hunter to any financial crimes or bribery. The impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden, which was spearheaded by Comer, was a complete bust. Judge Pirro failed to mention that in December, Alexander Smirnov, the former FBI informant who originally implicated President Biden and his son Hunter in a bribery scheme, pleaded guilty to lying to the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as the FBI. He also admitted to tax evasion for not reporting more than $2 million in income. James Comer did have access to the Department of Justice. Hunter Biden was investigated and convicted of charges involving lying about his drug use when he purchased a firearm, and he also pleaded guilty to tax charges. Now, one reason why Joe Biden might have issued these blanket pardons. Here we go. 3 days before President Donald J. Trump's inauguration, Comer encouraged the incoming Department of Justice to investigate and prosecute James Biden, Joe Biden's brother. Comer claimed James Biden lied to Congress to protect his brother. And he's not the only lawmaker who did this. During an appearance on Fox Business after President Biden issued a pardon for his son Hunter, Representative Nicole Maliotakis, a Republican from New York, said, "Our investigation must continue, I believe, to let the American public know the truth, even if these pardons are taking place." And she was inferring in the full context that it was Hunter Biden. So they just keep wanting to waste time on these investigations that have yielded nothing. The folks on Fox keep repeating false claims about Hunter Biden, just one right after the other. I could go down a list of all of the false claims that this is like their boogeyman that they go back to, and then they'll ignore it for months, and then they go back to it when it's convenient. There's nothing there. They won't stop, and this is exactly why Joe Biden did what he did. So this is from, in my humble opinion, I can't read Joe Biden's mind, but based on the fact that James Comer basically said 3 days before the inauguration, let's go after James Biden, is it that shocking that Joe Biden would do this? No. So this is from Thursday on Fox and Friends. Ansley Einhart, this is a very strange comment that she makes, bringing up Trump's vow not to pardon himself at the end of his first term. It's very odd.
You remember when it was in the news when Trump was leaving office? Are you going to pardon yourself? And he said, I didn't want to pardon myself last night or my family because we did nothing wrong. But the media ran with that. They couldn't believe that it could be considered for him to pardon himself. And then look exactly what Joe Biden did. He pardoned everyone in his family preemptively, just in case the Republicans went after him. And Pam Bondi already said, we don't have an enemies list.
But think about it. Had Trump pardoned himself, none of those prosecutions at the federal level ever would have happened.
So Einhart's comment is very odd there because she's getting outraged about, well, Trump never pardoned himself, implying that Biden just pardoned himself. Biden did not pardon himself. That did not happen, so I'm not sure why you're talking about that. Also, want to add, and I included a hyperlink in the newsletter to the entire full list, President Trump pardoned quite a few people, close advisors, staff members, and whatnot, who were convicted or pled guilty to crimes that involved his administration. So, yeah, I guess we just forgot about that on Fox, didn't we? That didn't happen. That didn't happen. Steve Bannon? Pfft, That didn't happen. There's so many of them. There's so many. I can't go through the whole list. But yeah, plenty of pardons that were very controversial. And again, the full list is included in the hyperlink on the newsletter. So next up, we go to the folks at Fox had a very different feelings about Trump's decision to pardon January 6th rioters. So almost immediately after he was sworn in, President Trump pardoned over 1,500 people and commuted the sentences of 14 related to the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 2021. This is the night of the inauguration. This is Judge Jeanine Pirro dismissing any controversy surrounding this. They're kind of doing what they did with Dominion. They sort of, Dominion they mentioned once on air and then never again. But this, they're just trying to make this go away.
The same Biden administration is objecting to any pardoning of the J6 hostages by saying that, well, if Trump gives them a pardon, it's got to be an admission of guilt. I mean, it's typical hypocrisy that and I'm sure most of America will be happy to get rid of going forward because we don't have to deal with that hypocrisy anymore.
I'm not sure where the hypocrisy is because Joe Biden didn't pardon anyone in a violent mob who violently attacked police officers and smashed our Capitol to bits. That didn't happen. Joe Biden pardoned Congress members who were on a panel, a committee that investigated January 6th. Joe Biden pardoned a military general that Trump, see, it's going to happen. I'm already doing it. Fox and Trump are becoming the same thing. That Trump said had committed treason, which is what Trump had said about Mark Milley. Fox has completely invented this whole crazy story about Dr. Anthony Fauci. It's so elaborate and so insane. This whole completely fake narrative about him being like an evil mastermind. That yes, I get why Joe Biden would pardon him as well as his family members, because again, they were openly threatened. So this is also from the night of the inauguration. This is the musician, or whatever you want to call him, Kid Rock, commenting, because we need his opinion.
I mean, he's already to work. 1,500 J6ers out, I heard already?
I think 17.
Great.
It was actually not 1,700. I looked that up. It's somewhere in between 1,500 and 1,600. So I will say this, too, that was very interesting because I went back to just try to see what I could find. I double-checked my work this week with Sean Hannity to see what he said about this because he really avoided this topic. He completely avoided this topic. I'm not sure why. He just didn't want to talk about it at all. The only pardons he talked about were the ones issued by Biden. He just didn't talk about this at all. Just didn't talk about it. Now, this next one is Laura Ingraham. This is the next night on her show, The Ingraham Angle, with a bizarre twist on this take as well.
What they're really mad about, it's not the pardons, the J6ers. Obviously, Biden set a much more dangerous precedent. They're mad that he's actually delivering on his promises one by one.
That's an interesting pivot there. No, I can genuinely say that people are enraged that violent leaders of organized hate groups, organized militias that are formed to hurt people, yes, that, Donald J. Trump's like, let him go, let him free. Because seditious conspiracy, which I will go in depth later in the podcast and pack that in depth, is a very serious crime. And people are genuinely mad about it. It's not that he's getting things done, as, Laura Ingraham would try to spin that. It's absolutely outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. Now, this is the next morning on Fox and Friends, Brian Kilmeade.
And it's amazing they just show up and they just talk about those pardons when not one question about how do you view Joe Biden's pardons, preemptive pardons, first time in history for his family. Also, when he talked about the pardons, you let everyone go on the J6 pardons. He goes, well, look at the other pardons on the other side. And today, as every network spends 45 minutes of every hour talking about the January 6 pardons, many of which people were just walking through, some of which were serious.
So there's a slight edit, and his co-host, Lawrence Jones, also chimes in with a very old, tired argument that's really easy to knock down.
Puts cold water on their argument when it comes to the cops and protesters. We watched our cities be burned for months, and they assaulted cops for months, and there was no pushback. There were no charges. The feds weren't even on the ground to prosecute these people. So I don't want anybody targeting cops, but I think what ended up happening, according to some of the reports, and I pretty much confirm it, is when there was some debate going on about who to pardon, and they kept going back and forth, and he said, just pardon them all. Right. Just pardon them all. I'm not going to do this. If this is your effort to delay me getting the J6's pardon, the people that were overcharged, which a lot of legal scholars agree, then I'm just going to pardon them all.
Yeah. It honestly wouldn't be that difficult to figure out which people to pardon and which not, because only a handful of them got insanely long sentences and were convicted of seditious conspiracy and things related to seditious conspiracy. It wasn't a lot of people. The larger number were people who committed much lesser crimes. But the big ones, the leader of the Proud Boys, the leader of the Oath Keepers, other people involved with the Oath Keepers, and other, again, organized violent militia groups who often are also imbued with hateful ideology, white supremacy, white nationalism, really nasty. So I would also argue it's a false equivalence to try to compare protests that went on for months across the country in most major cities. Months. It started in the spring, went through the summer of 2020, when, by the way, Donald J. Trump was president, and we were experiencing this, catastrophic global pandemic. Now, during that time, that's very difficult to compare something like that to a single act of extreme violence at our nation's capital by a group of extremists who wanted to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. So yes, those two things aren't the same. They're just not the same. Jones implied that there were no arrests during the 2020, Black Lives Matter or George Floyd protests. That's absurd. They do this all the time on Fox. They act as if nobody was arrested. There's just all this property damage, and all of law enforcement across the country just, did nothing, which is false. And they also somehow blame all the governors and mayors. They don't blame the president, who was, of course, Donald J. Trump when this was happening. So according to BuzzFeed News, and this was published in June 2020, so this is still when the protests were still ongoing, police had arrested 11,000 people across the country for various crimes involving the George Floyd protests. The Washington Post, same month, tallied 14,000 arrests across 49 cities. And according to their research, only 3.7% of the arrests were related to property damage and vandalism. So the last source, which is probably the most accurate because it was tallied after the protests were finished, basically, in October of 2020, The Hill reported 17,000 arrests related to the demonstrations, most of which were related to non-violent offenses. The protests in 2020 were also much larger and broader in scope than the January 6th attack on the Capitol. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, which is ACLED, and there's a hyperlink in the newsletter, between May 24th and August 22nd, 2020, there were more than 10,600 George Floyd demonstrations and events across the country. Over 10,100 of these, or nearly 95%, involved peaceful protesters. Fewer than 570, or approximately 5%, involved demonstrations engaging in violence. Well over 80% of all demonstrations were connected to the Black Lives Matter movement or the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, one of the reasons why this gets warped and skewed in the public sphere is because what makes a good clip for television? Something on fire. You set a Wendy's on fire, that clip's going to get, broadcast everywhere all the time because it's a dramatic image, and that's going to get put on social media, that's going to get repeated everywhere. People are going to make up false stories about it, the whole 9 yards. A peaceful protest with people walking around with signs is not going, especially when there's thousands of them, is probably not going to get the same kind of coverage. And that's part of the problem with how media treats these things. So next up, we're going to get to Trump talking about his decision to pardon January 6th rioters. So these are in his own words. And again, Sean Hannity did not talk about this. He avoided this topic. And you're going to see it a little bit in this interview. This was his exclusive that aired on Wednesday and Thursday, I believe, of last week. I got both of them. And it was a doozy because Trump lied through this whole thing. Here you go.
You did run on a platform. You were very straightforward. You said you would pardon these people that were sentenced for January 6th.
Yeah, totally.
You did. The only criticism or pushback I've seen is about people that were convicted or were involved in incidents where they were violent with police. Why did they get a pardon?
So this is audio. I want to add a slight detail so you kind of can get the picture of what's happening here, because they're in the White House when this interview is happening. Trump's face lit up when he was asked this question. He was prepared. And that just completely creeped me out.
Number of reasons. Number one, they were in there for 3.5 years, a long time.
Right.
And in many solitary confinement, treated like nobody's ever been treated so badly. They were treated like the worst criminals in history. And you know what they were there for? They were protesting the vote because they knew the election was rigged and they were protesting the vote. And that you should be allowed to protest a vote. You should be allowed to. You know, when the day comes...
But you shouldn't be able to invade the Capitol.
No, ready? Most of the people were absolutely innocent. Okay, but forgetting all about that, these people have served horribly a long time. It would be very, very cumbersome to go and look. You know how many people we're talking about? 1,500 people. Almost all of them this should not have happened. And the other thing is this, some of those people with the police, true, but they were very minor incidents.
Now, I would argue it was not at all difficult to look up who the worst offenders were, and he had time. He knew, he won in November. You had time to do this. I just think he wanted to pardon them all to look as good as possible to these absolute psychotic extremists that he's catering to. So, according to reporting by the New York Times, here's a little list I came up with about what actually happened here. One officer lost the tip of his right index finger. Other officers were smashed in the head with baseball bats, flagpoles, and pipes. An officer lost consciousness as rioters used a metal barrier to push her into stairs. She was actually the first one to fall down and go unconscious. Some of the injuries included concussions, which include neurological impairment, heightened anxiety, PTSD, orthopedic injuries that required surgery and rehabilitation, rib fractures, burns, traumatic brain injuries, shattered spinal discs, stabbing. A suspect used a metal fence stake. Mild heart attack. The officer was repeatedly hit with a stun gun, and strokes. Of the 1,200 Capitol Police officers, only 170 were equipped with riot gear. 140 officers were injured, 73 Capitol Police, approximately 65 Metropolitan Police. Officer Brian Sicknick died immediately after the attack of a stroke. 4 officers committed suicide soon after the attack. And I read a very long piece in the New York Times that sort of explained why some of these officers may have committed suicide. After the January 6th attack, the Capitol Police were panicked and had these poor men and women working extremely long hours. And at this time, nobody had really been arrested, or very few people had been arrested. So these officers had just endured hours of hand-to-hand combat with these people, and they were paranoid and panicked that it would happen again, and that every person that they saw could be the next person to attack them. So there's a lot going on here. Again, that piece was in the New York Times. It was 49 pages. I read the whole thing. It was very well written. We criticize the Times for a number of things. They still do excellent investigative journalism. They're in editorial situation. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But here you go. Here's more of this ridiculous interview.
They get built up by a couple of fake guys that are on CNN all the time.
Nobody watches.
They were very minor incidents, and it was time. You have murderers in Philadelphia. You have murderers in Los Angeles that don't even get any time. They don't even collect them, and they know they're there to be collected. And then they go on television and act holier than thou about this one or that one. You had 1,500 people that suffered. That's a lot of people. You know, they were looking for new people 2 weeks ago. They were looking, wait a minute, they were looking to charge new people. They have a woman who's 76 years old that they said made a statement that was a little bit out of line years after the fact. This was a political hoax.
So then he, you know how they call this his weave because he's kind of going all over the place? He makes a crazy pivot here to his favorite subject, which is ratings.
And you know what? Those people, and I'm not saying in every single case, but there was a lot of patriotism with those people, a lot of patriotism. You know, they did a recording, and, you know, they asked me if I'd do the voiceover, and I did. Yeah. Do you know it was the #1 selling, whatever you call it nowadays, album, whatever, song,
CD,
whatever you call it. You don't know, it changes every year, right? But it was the #1 selling song, #1 on Billboard, #1 on everything for so long. People get it. They wanted to see those people.
American people were aware. You told them that.
So Trump did do a voiceover for a recording called Justice for All. The track included incarcerated January 6th rioters reciting the Pledge of Allegiance and singing the Star-Spangled Banner. All proceeds from the recording went to a fund for family members of the suspects. The song was briefly #4 on the Billboard Bubbling Hot 100 singles and achieved #1 status Billboard Digital Song Sales chart. It was very brief. I checked right after this happened. I checked it and it had already fallen off the chart. Pretty much it was on #1 for like a second and then dropped off. And that's ridiculous. What a weird, stupid argument to make. Well, people wanted this because this stupid, horrible song that I created that was disrespectful and disgusting was briefly #1 by my cult members. Anyway, I forgot to do my commercial in the middle of my podcast. It's a little bit towards the end of the podcast. So here we go. If you're wondering who pays for Decoding Fox News, who's my sponsor, who's my benefactor, that would be the listeners of this podcast and the readers of my Substack channel. I have no large donor. I have no large benefactor. I'm not a trustafarian, trust fund kid. My father was an auto mechanic and my mother was a school teacher. So there's no money there. And I have 3 siblings, so there's no money there. But if you would like to become a financial supporter of Decoding Fox News, I could always use you, especially now as we enter this scary, scary time. Subscriptions for my Substack start at $5 a month, $55 for the year. Founding members at $168, which, you know, some people do that just because they're amazing and thank you. Or, you know, just sharing this podcast is also amazing. Sharing the newsletter to your friends is also amazing. My Patreon has different levels, but everybody gets the same thing because I'm massively overworked. And I kind of view it like socialism over there. Everybody gets the same thing no matter what your level is, because I can't afford to make more stuff. But just the time, I'm just always overworked. I also want to give a shout out very quickly to someone named Joseph who sent me a nice note. He bought something from the Amazon wish list. There's not that many items on it anymore. There's one expensive item left. It's a hard drive. Miss Joseph bought one of the hard drives, which is incredible because I have to get 3 at the start of every year, and it's difficult for me to incur that cost. One's for 2005, one's a backup, and one's a backup for the archives. That's why I need 3. And they do break, so you do need to get one. And I get SSDs, people. I get the good ones that don't break as often. So that's about it. I don't want to talk about this anymore, but if you would like to become a sponsor, please become a sponsor. I could always use you. And that's it. So back to what is seditious conspiracy? So according to 18 U.S.C. 2384 United States Code, if 2 or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States contrary to the authority thereof, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years, or both. So got that directly from the source, which is the U.S. government. And here we go. This is an excerpt from the Department of Justice criminal conviction of 4 members of the Oath Keepers who were convicted of seditious conspiracy. So this is word for word what was written after they were convicted. I also say, just as a tip, the DOJ puts all of this out there for the public. So you can look this up very easily on just about anybody who's been federally charged with a crime and convicted of a crime. You can look up their charging documents and you can look up when they've been convicted and you can read it directly, exactly what happened. Very transparent. Here we go. The defendants also collectively employed a variety of manners and means, including organizing into teams that were prepared and willing to use force and to transport firearms and ammunition into Washington, D.C., recruiting members and affiliates, organizing trainings to teach and learn paramilitary combat tactics, bringing and contributing paramilitary gear, weapons, and supplies, including knives, batons, camouflage combat uniforms, tactical vests with plates, helmets, eye protection, and radio equipment to the Capitol grounds, breaching and attempting to take control of the Capitol grounds and building on January 6, 2021, in an effort to prevent, hinder, and delay the certification of the Electoral College vote, using force against law enforcement officers while inside the Capitol on January 6, 2021, continuing to plot after January 6, 2021, to oppose by force the lawful transfer of presidential power, and using websites, social media, text messaging, and encrypted messaging applications to communicate with each other and others. Next paragraph, this is kind of a jump later. While certain Oath Keepers, members, and affiliates breached the Capitol grounds and buildings, others remained stationed just outside of the city in Quick Reaction Force, or QRF teams. According to the government's evidence, the QRF teams were prepared to rapidly transport firearms and other weapons into Washington, D.C. in support of operations aimed at using force to stop the lawful transfer of presidential power. This is 100% true. They had guns and ammo at a second location, and they were willing and prepared to bring them to the Capitol and start slaughtering. And I use that term, I don't use that term lightly, slaughtering our elected officials, government employees, and members of law enforcement, because that's what they were going to have to do in order to make this dream a reality that they had. Now, I'm going to briefly play a clip from PBS. This is how a legitimate news network covered this same issue. This is from Tuesday. Jeff Bennett, one of the co-hosts, one of the co-anchors, I should say, of the PBS NewsHour, interviewed Denver Riggleman, a senior technical advisor to the January 6th committee. Riggleman is also an Air Force veteran and former Republican congressman. He now identifies as an independent.
We're joined now by former GOP congressman and advisor to the House January 6th committee, Denver Riggleman. Welcome back to the NewsHour.
Thanks for having me.
These pardons, I mean, this is a real body blow for the U.S. justice system in the sense that this was the single largest criminal investigation in U.S. history. Nearly every FBI field office, nearly every U.S. attorney's office were involved in these prosecutions. Now, all but 14 people have been pardoned. The other 14 had their sentences commuted. How does all of this land with you?
It's heinous. We have insurrectionists that were actually pardoned. And I think it's just ludicrous that that's happening in the United States of America. And I don't think it's just a body blow against the Department of Justice. I think it's a body blow against the American people. And the fact is that the Republican Party can't claim to run on law and order ever again. And for me personally, knowing what happened that day, that these coup-like movements and these insurrectionists are being pardoned by the presidents of the United States, I think it rattles our allies also, and it really shakes the foundations of everything we stand for as Americans.
What's the real-world impact of these pardons and the fact that these rioters are being released from prison?
Well, I think the real-world impact are these individuals are back in their communities where they can organize, they can run for office. Sixers that are presented with medals, that they actually get positions within certain government offices, maybe on the staffs of congressional representatives who support this kind of nonsense and this kind of insanity. I think that's the real-world implications. And also, when you look at U.S. Capitol Police and those that were attacked that day, it's really this baseline disrespect against law enforcement, right? It's not back the blue, it's screw the blue. And I think that's what you're saying from the GOP today. And, for me, how are they going to recruit the type of people that they need when they see that there's nobody backing them up, especially when they were trying to protect the Capitol and our most, I would say, enshrined and valuable institutions that were attacked that day by really ignorant, violent insurrectionists.
I thought he was the perfect person they could have talked to, because yes, they could have talked to any of the members of Congress, but I like the fact that they talked to him because he's former military, former Republican, and he just holds nothing back. And I thought there was a great counterpoint to this idea of somebody willing to stand up for members of law enforcement and somebody willing to say, look, how insane this is, that you can't say that you're for law and order and, being tough on crime and allow this to happen. So just an excellent guest, in my humble opinion. So next up, this is sort of a bonus that I stuck on here, also from PBS, but I really wanted you to hear it. Oh my goodness, did I want you to hear this. I wanted you to hear this. Like, as soon as this happened in real time, I was jumping out of my skin going, that's in the podcast. That's in the podcast. So here we go. This is Sunday night before the inauguration. PBS featured a segment with Craig Holman of Public Citizen, a consumer advocacy group and think tank. Holman was interviewed by Ali Rogan, a PBS weekend correspondent, and he's going to describe, I'm just going to let him talk for himself here, how donations to inaugural committees work. And this is shocking.
You've put together a research document on the Trump-Vance inaugural committee fundraising. How much have they raised and who's donating?
It's shattering all records this time around. The Trump inaugural committee originally targeted $150 million to spend on the inauguration, which by itself would break records. Then it upped it to $200 million because money just started flowing in. And today we know it's going to be around $250 million. And it shatters not only all records in terms of spending, but also in terms of donations. The donations that we're aware of at this point are all $1 million to $5 million. From the same donors who used to give to previous inaugurations, Trump's first one, but back then it was in amounts of maybe $50,000 or $100,000.
You mentioned that it's some of the same folks. So who tends to be high on the list?
Well, at top of this list is the cryptocurrency industry.
Related festivities are over. What happens to the money that's left over, and what does the law say about it?
There is no restriction on how the surplus money gets spent, and there is no disclosure. If Trump doesn't want to tell us how he spent the surplus money, we aren't going to know what happened to it. When it comes to the inaugural funding, there are so few rules in place. Only two. One, foreign nationals can't make a donation. And the second is we find out sometime in the spring, the donors of $200 or more. We don't know how the money gets spent. We don't know what happens to the surplus funds. And quite frankly, there's no restriction on how Trump dispenses the surplus funds.
And I have a link to the research document that she mentions that he wrote on Public Citizen. And here's a short list of some of the contributors to the Trump-Vance Inaugural Committee, Inc. So from cryptocurrency, a company named Ripple donated $5 million, Coinbase, $1 million, MoonPay, $1 million, and Kraken, $1 million. Big Tech, Tim Cook of Apple, $1 million. Jeff Bezos of Amazon, $1 million. Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, $1 million. Sam Altman of OpenAI, $1 million. Bankers in Wall Street, Ken Griffin, a hedge fund manager, also donated $1 million. Bank of America, $1 million. Goldman Sachs, $1 million. And Ondo Finance, $1 million. So absolutely outrageous. There is legislation that's been pending for years to reform this. And the gentleman that you just heard spoke, Holman, said he was hopeful that maybe this obnoxious amount of money that was raised and, very nefarious, like, where is it going? What are you paying for? All of that might move the needle, but I don't think it will probably until Trump is out of there. But anyway, before we get into the next segment, I feel like I have to do it because I haven't done one in forever. Because I didn't do that the first couple of weeks of the year. We just had horribly depressing, sad topics, so I couldn't really work it in. I did one last podcast, but here you go. Since you guys always ask, and I get notes like, where is it? Where is it? Oh, here we go. So I'm Judge Janine, and how dare anybody question what Donald J. Trump does with the money people give him for his inauguration? Maybe he wants fancy flowers. Maybe he wants a crazy hat for Melania to wear, which she looked stunning, didn't she, Hamburglar? navy. It looked black. People said she was going to a funeral. He couldn't kiss her because the hat was too big, yet she found a way to kiss Gavin Newsom. True story. But I'm Judge Janine, and you could just shut up if you don't like it, or I'm going to throw this pen. Can you believe Kristi Noem, the puppy killer, was in New York City? She better not come near me, because I'm going to throw a dog biscuit at her, that evil, evil woman. That's one thing I like about Judge Janine. She doesn't like Kristi Noem. She probably won't say it, but she's made a number of comments about that puppy killer thing. Because the woman loves dogs, and a tip of the hat. One thing we have in common, we love animals. That's it. Hey, my weirdo animal, Odin, because again, I'm nearing the end of the podcast, just jumped on the desk, which will make weird noises in my microphone, so give me a minute. Odin is now on my lap, staring at me, thinking, when are you going to quit? Because I want to just hang out with you, crazy lady. Don't talk into that microphone. He sometimes bites the microphone. I'm not kidding. I think he knows. He sees it as a something he's jealous of. Much like when I'm petting Thor, he will jump and throw himself in between me and Thor, so I pet him. He's a very insecure cat. I don't know why. Anyway, here we go. Stories Fox News ignored. Every week I compare the hours I've watched on Fox to 5 hours of the PBS NewsHour. The following list are stories that PBS covered that Fox News did not. And I'm just going to quick note, if a publication is listed at the end of these headlines, it's a direct quote. So I just pulled it. I don't want to get called for plagiarism. I'm very open about where I get my stuff. And I'm not reporting on these. I'm just reporting on what PBS reported on. See how that works. So here we go. Although Fox News did spend a lot of time criticizing President Biden over various presidential pardons, no one at the network included that Biden granted civil rights leader Marcus Garvey a posthumous grant of clemency for a mail fraud conviction in 1923. That means he is no longer with us. He has passed. Civil rights leaders have argued for decades that Garvey's conviction was based on fabricated evidence, was racially motivated, and related to his activism for Black Americans. President Joe Biden also brokered a prisoner swap with the Taliban, which resulted in the release of 2 unidentified American citizens held in Afghanistan in exchange for Khan Mohammed, who was sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment in 2008 for drug trafficking and terrorism charges. Last Tuesday, employees of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services were told to halt all public communications. A memo issued by the acting head of HHS, Dr. Dorothy Fink, directed the agency to refrain from most external communications, such as issuing documents, guidance, or notices, until such documents can be approved by a presidential appointee. That's very Project 2025. That was from NPR. The State Department suspended all foreign assistance around the world for at least 3 months. That affects tens of billions of dollars on programs that run from military assistance to Ukraine to supporting police in Mexico who interdict fentanyl coming into the U.S. So this is very bad. That's from the PBS NewsHour. Prince Harry claimed a monumental victory Wednesday as Rupert Murdoch's UK tabloids made an unprecedented apology for intruding into his life over decades and agreed to pay substantial damages to settle his privacy invasion lawsuit. Amazing. That is incredibly rare. And that's again from the PBS NewsHour. PBS included an extended segment about a voluntary program in California that includes incarcerated men and women in firefighting teams deployed to battle wildfires. The program has supporters and critics, as some argue it's a pathway to a better life and career, while others have called it exploitative. PBS also included short memorials for some of the 27 people who lost their lives in the California fires. They included short biographies and memories from friends and loved ones. I have a hyperlink in the newsletter if you want to check that out. I thought they were very well done and very touching. And of course, Fox is never going to do anything like that. The International Criminal Court's top prosecutor is seeking arrest warrants for 2 Taliban leaders over the repression of women in Afghanistan. The Taliban has cracked down on women's rights since taking back control of the country in 2021. Laws there bar women from jobs, most public spaces, and education beyond the 6th grade. That's from PBS. In Thailand, marriage equality is now the law of the land. A historic bill took effect granting LGBTQ plus people the same marital rights as heterosexual couples. By the end of the day, some 1,800 couples across Thailand had tied the knot. So that was taken from PBS, and the whole list is also from PBS. So here we go. OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma and the family who owns it will pay up to $7.4 billion to settle lawsuits stemming from the opioid crisis. Purdue agreed to pay nearly $900 million. The Sackler family itself will pay upwards of $6.5 billion and give up ownership of the company. That is $500 million more than a previous deal, which was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court last year. The deal does not shield the family from future lawsuits, which is a big win. The Lumbee tribe of North Carolina got a major boost in its decades-long fight to become federally recognized. President Trump signed a memo directing the Interior Secretary to submit a plan for full federal recognition of the tribe. A federal judge barred the leader of the far-right Oath Keepers group, Stuart Rhodes, from entering Washington, D.C. without court approval. It comes days after President Trump commuted his 18-year prison sentence for coordinating the Capitol attack in 2021. The U.S. Supreme Court said it would hear a case on whether to allow the nation's first publicly funded religious charter school to open in Oklahoma. The case centers on a proposal by the Catholic Church in Oklahoma to establish an online school that would incorporate religious teachings into its curriculum. PBS included a segment about the founders of a non-profit app, Watch Duty. The app provides real-time updates and notifications from official sources during wildfires. The free app has interactive maps allowing users to track evacuation zones, shelter locations, Lime camera feeds, and fire perimeters, as well as information about containment on specific fires. What's interesting about that app is it started in California, but it's spreading across the country, which I think is pretty amazing. And it's kind of amazing how they keep it going. It's nonprofit. It's run on donations. I was very impressed by that. Jules Feiffer, a Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist and writer whose prolific output ranged from a long-running comic strip to plays, screenplays, and children's book, died Friday. He was 95 and, true to his seemingly tireless form, published his last book just 4 months ago. So all of those stories, all of them that I just went through, were not included on Fox. So by the numbers, each week I compared the top 5 topics on Fox to the top 5 topics on PBS. Here we go. We're starting with Fox. This is how obnoxious it was. It was very hard to watch this. 53% of the coverage. It wasn't the inauguration. These are just segments where they just praised Trump. And I call them Trump worship. So 53% of the content I watched last week were people praising Trump. 8% was the inauguration. There was just sort of straight stories about, like, this is what's happening. This is, ooh, look, there's a band, that sort of thing. 5% mass deportations, 5% Israel-Hamas war, and 3% the Biden pardons. Notice the Trump pardons weren't on there. Okay, PBS. Top 5 topics for the week ending 1/26/25. Trump's new term, 10%. Mass deportations, 8%. Israel-Hamas war, 8%. 7%. Trump's pardon of the January 6th rioters, much more important. And 6% Trump's executive orders. We're going to have Trump, I have a feeling, at a lot of the top of these categories because he just dominated everything, as he does. Yay, fun times. Words used on Fox News for the week ending January 26, 2025. Trump at 935. Biden, 286. Border, 221. Pardon, 154. And again, that was mostly Biden. Israel, 149. China, 107. Fire, 81. Crime, 76. FEMA, 43. January 6th, 37. Panama, 29. Mandate, 27. Inflation, 26. Trans, as in transgender, 12. Hunter, 9. Landslide, 5. AOC, 4. They had a whole segment about her. And Greenland, 2. I was happy that Greenland was so low on the list. I'm like, please leave Denmark alone. Just leave Denmark alone. And that's it for the podcast. Odin, again, on my lap, he says hello. He's just staring at me like, why are you still talking? I know, Odin. It's okay. If you'd like to check out more of my work, you can go to Twitter, also known as X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, not so much though, YouTube, and I think I got them all. And if you'd like to become a paid subscriber, please go to my Substack for Decoding Fox News, my Patreon for Decoding Fox News. I should finally be able to have time to get back to Project 2025. I could not breathe. I could not breathe from the election into the end of the year, because the end of the year stuff actually takes forever. Then we had a terrorist attack. Then we had these major fires. Then we had the inauguration. And it's finally calming down a little bit. It won't, because Trump's crazy. He'll be crazy, crazy, crazy. But hopefully I'll be able to work that stuff back in. I want to, because now we're living it. We're living it horribly. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Odin and Thor send their love. Also, you can hear a version of this at the Resolute Square YouTube channel. And that's about it. I will see you at the next podcast.
Resolute Square.